Everybody, it is Matt, and we are here to do another uh, interview on one of the cards in the Minor Arcana. And I'm here with Greg Hatch, who is a fiber artist based in Northeast Ohio, where I am from. And it's funny, I knew I was going to reach out to Greg as soon as we started lining up folks to talk to the interviews. And Greg was one of the first people I talked to, and he was hesitant to jump in on the Ten of Swords because it's a dangerous card. It's a sharp card. Uh, and it's funny how when we lined that up first, it was subsequently when and I talked to other folks, it was really in demand. Everybody wanted to talk about this card, which is funny. So you and I lined this up, one of the first outreach I did, and then now a bunch of people are like, "Ooh, I want to do some Ten of Swords," and it's kind of interesting. So I'm excited to see kind of. We locked in on Greg. We locked in on you because there was a reason that you and I needed to talk about this. So thanks for joining, Greg.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Tell me. So let's start with kind of your approach to the Ten of Swords. What is kind of the exciting thing about that card, or what drew you to it?
So the one thing that made me really excited about actually your version of this card was I love the text that you put below the illustrations, and I love that it was ruin and renewal. I really love actually looking at the Ten of Swords because oftentimes when you're doing a spread, if you're doing a reading and you get the Ten of Swords, you're like, ooh, okay. Well, that's not a great message, but I like the kind of reminder that each of these endings lead to something else. And this card in particular came up in a spread where I was doing some work, kind of talking to the individuals who have, gone before me. And it was a good reminder. It was a good reminder to look at those aspects of that endings are needed for new things to start, and not to be hesitant or fearful of endings because they are going to come no matter what, even if you are scared.
That's awesome. That's really insightful. It's yes, I agree with everything you just said. That's great. Greg, do you have any relationship with Vultures? I mean, I know where I used to live and where you live currently. There's a big celebration in the spring when they come back. I mean, there's a lot of vulture. I would say veneration, maybe the wrong word. There's a lot of enjoyment or identification with vultures in our region. What's your kind of connection to the vultures? Do you have some?
Well, so it's interesting that you mentioned about the Hinckley Return of the Vultures, because I just finished Barnstorming in Ohio by David Giffels.
Oh, yeah.
And that book ends with with that event, so I really enjoy that.
Oh, that's really cool. I love David's stuff. I should read that book. I haven't read it yet.
Oh yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it as actually an audiobook. I love audiobooks. Awesome. So there's sort of two things I sort of think about with the Vultures. The first thing is the fact that my dad had the sticker for a local radio station, 1-800, sorry, I can't speak, 100.7 The Buzzard.
WMMS. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it was a sticker on his metal lunchbox that he took every day to go to work. And that was always present in my life. And then also when I did grad school down at Ohio University, turkey vultures were around the grad studios, which the grad studios are at the Ridges, which is the former Athens sanatorium.
Wow, yeah, I've heard of that. That's really cool. That's really cool.
And I actually have to say, after I did the reading that I got this card, I was on my way to work, and right outside my house was a turkey vulture, which is a little bit weird actually for Cleveland. They're not actually that common. So my family is never subtle, so we really like to make sure that messages are very well received. And really, we repeat ourselves a lot, as evident in this interview. And so, yeah, you mentioned about the idea of the vulture and the idea of the turkey vulture or the buzzard being very much almost a mascot in this area, or just very prevalent. Um, I do wonder if it deals with sort of the nature of the last 150 years of the area, and particularly the connection with industry and of that idea of development, decline, and then revitalization. And then the cycle just keeps on repeating and repeating. And also, I think Vultures had a really personal connection to me because I grew up going on Saturdays to the scrapyard with my dad to take in a load of scrap. So I grew up very much with the driving along the ways, and you see something in the garbage, you're like, "Ooh, what's that?" Which has led to some storage issues in my life. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I actually feel like the Vulture is a really good mascot.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's very much. It feels like it's built for our time and our place, at least. You know, it just seems, you know, someone who can thrive in these cycles that kind of keep happening, which is compelling. I really love the way you kind of compare that industrialization and then decline, and then the repercussions of that industrialization. You know, and the scrap. Rust is a big part of your persona, how you approach things. You use that for dyeing, right, Greg?
I do. So I actually, when I do walks, I'll pick up pieces of scrap metal that are on the ground in my neighborhood, and then I'll use them for scrap dyeing, where you allow the rust to actually transfer onto the fabric itself. And I love that mark. I absolutely love mark making that's done through time and the memory of a material. And Rust does that in such a wonderful way. And yeah, it's interesting. I think it's also just so familiar.
Oh wow, I like that. Yeah, I like that.
It's a weird
the way that's kind of no. I mean, it just feels like a thread of your life. It's really great.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the whole thing. Like, especially like going around, like, and looking down, seeing what's on the ground, picking it up. Does it have a certain value to me? Can I use it? That sort of thing. I always have affinity to any scavenger or carrion for that reason. I'm always like, oh, what's this? Nah, I can't use it. Put it back down.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like bringing new life to something that's been discarded and gone. It's kind of beautiful. That's a great bookend. That's beautiful. Greg, anything else about the card, or about, do you draw it in other decks? Do you use other decks? Do you see this card in other places?
So the other decks I have, which are the ones I bought during my teens, and this probably tells you a lot about teen Greg, was I have a Greek mythology deck and I have a vampire deck.
It does tell me a lot.
Yes, it does. I was very much that teen, and especially since you grew up in our area, you know the type of teen I was. Yeah,
that's awesome.
But yeah, it's weird when I actually drew this card, especially for that reading. Such a weird over sense of relief came over me. Which is obviously not a common thing that people will experience when pulling the Ten of Swords.
Right.
But I was, it actually was like, oh, it's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. There's vultures.
I love it. I really love how that through line really kind of fits with you. That's great. so glad we stuck with this card or we locked in on it early because it really fits with you. I love it.
Well, it's sort of funny because as I mentioned when you first introduced this project, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if it's a good idea for me to select Ruin as a pursuit. Um, but I was like, oh, but I'm also selecting Renewal, so maybe it'll be a good transition point.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. This is great. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for having this conversation. And thank you so much for honestly your book, because I love it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, and I'll admit, and this is, not to, inflate your ego anymore. I actually did not work with cards for a very long time until until I picked up your book, and it really was reading your book and seeing my surroundings and having that connection with Northeast Ohio and this area that really kind of drew me back to actually working with them and having it as a language for my practice.
That's so great, Greg. I'm so glad to hear that, man. I'm so glad to hear that.